The cartoon had been pinned to the ready room wall for 3 weeks now. Someone had drawn it in charcoal on brown packing paper, a fat, ugly shape with stubby wings and a ridiculous tail, looking more like a farmer's storage shed than a weapon of war. Underneath, in crude letters, Englischer Fliegen schon. The English Flying Barn. Every pilot who walked past it laughed. Hauptmann Werner Kolbe laughed too, the first time he saw it. He had 11 confirmed kills to his name, 11 British and American aircraft turned into twisted metal and burning fuel somewhere in the darkness over Germany. He knew what bombers looked like when they died. He knew how they twisted and screamed and fell. And he knew that the Avro Lancaster, for all its size and bomb-carrying capacity, was one of the easiest targets in the night sky. The Lancaster had no belly turret. The British, in their infinite wisdom, had removed it to save weight and carry more bombs. This left a massive blind spot directly beneath the aircraft where a night fighter could approach completely unseen. The rear gunner might spot you if you came from behind, and the mid-upper gunner covered the top, but from below. Nothing. Just 30 tons of aluminum and fuel and high explosives, hanging in the darkness like a gift. Tonight, the gift would be delivered again. The sirens began their wail at 2300 hours. Kolbe was already in his flight suit, already walking toward his Messerschmitt Bf-110 night fighter where his radar operator, Feldwebel Dieter Hahn, waited beside the aircraft. The ground crew had painted 11 small silhouettes beneath Kolbe's cockpit, one for each kill. Tonight, God willing, they would paint a 12th. Intelligence reported a massive bomber stream crossing the Dutch coast. Over 400 aircraft heading for Essen, the industrial heart of the Ruhr Valley. Most of them were Lancasters. Kolbe smiled as he climbed into the cockpit. 400 flying barns, fat and slow, carrying their loads of death toward German cities. Some would get through. They always did. But not all of them. Not tonight. The Bf-110 roared down the runway and lifted into darkness. Behind Kolbe, Hahn hunched over his Liechtenstein radar set, watching the green glow of the cathode screen for contacts. The new radar was a marvel. It could detect a bomber from 4 kilometers away, giving them precious minutes to position for attack. The British had no idea the Germans could see them coming. They still believed the darkness kept them safe. 20 minutes into the patrol, Hahn's voice crackled through the intercom. Contact. Bearing 045, range 3,000 meters, slightly above. Kolbe banked toward the contact, his eyes straining against the darkness. The moon was a thin crescent tonight, providing just enough light to see silhouettes against the stars. He climbed gently, positioning himself below and behind the contact, approaching through the blind spot, and there it was. The unmistakable shape of a Lancaster, that broad, barn-like fuselage, those 4 massive engines, that twin tail rising against the star field. It really did look like a flying barn. Kolbe almost laughed. He closed to 200 meters, lined up his twin 20mm cannons on the port wing where the fuel tanks lived, and squeezed the trigger. The Lancaster exploded with light. Not from his cannons. From its rear turret. 4 Browning machine guns opened up in a blinding stream of tracer fire. Kolbe had been spotted. He jerked the control column instinctively, rounds cracking past his canopy close enough to feel. His own burst went wide, stitching holes across empty air. Then the Lancaster did something impossible. It rolled violently to port and dove, a corkscrew maneuver that threw 30 tons of aircraft through the sky like a leaf in a storm. Kolbe tried to follow, but the Bf-110 was not built for such violence. He overshot, lost the target, found himself suddenly above and ahead, exactly where the mid-upper gunner could see him. More tracers. More near misses. Kolbe dove away, heart pounding, the Lancaster vanishing into the darkness behind him. He spent another hour hunting. He found nothing. When he landed back at base, mechanics counted 7 bullet holes in his aircraft. He had fired perhaps 50 rounds. He had hit nothing. In the ready room, Kolbe poured himself a schnapps and stared at the cartoon on the wall. Through the window, he could see the eastern horizon glowing orange. Essen was burning. The barns had gotten through. Dieter Hahn sat down beside him, his face pale. Close tonight. Colby nodded. He looked at the cartoon again, that stupid, ugly drawing that had made everyone laugh. The joke didn't seem funny anymore. Somewhere inside that flying barn, a young man had seen him coming, had tracked him through the darkness, had nearly killed him with 4 machine guns and reflexes faster than thought. The Lancaster was slow. The Lancaster was ugly. The Lancaster had no belly turret. And yet the Lancaster was still flying, and Werner Colby was sitting here with 7 holes in his aircraft, drinking schnapps to stop his hands from shaking. 11 kills meant nothing if the 12th killed you first. That he finished his drink and went to bed. He did not sleep well. In his dreams, he kept seeing that shape against the stars, that fat, ugly barn with wings, and the muzzle flashes that bloomed from its tail like flowers of death. The Lancaster smelled of oil, metal, and cold sweat. Flight Sergeant Thomas Reeves climbed through the rear door and made his way down the fuselage toward his turret, squeezing past ammunition boxes and the cramped rest bed that nobody ever used. 19 missions down. 11 to go. The arithmetic of survival was simple and brutal: complete 30 operations and you could go home. Most crews didn't make 15. Tommy was 22 years old. He had been a shop assistant in Manchester before the war, selling shoes to housewives and dreaming of nothing more dangerous than a weekend football match. Now he sat in a glass bubble at the tail of a bomber, for Browning .303 machine guns at his fingertips, watching the darkness for shapes that wanted to kill him. He sealed himself into the rear turret and tested his guns. The turret was the loneliest place in Bomber Command. Separated from the rest of the crew by 30 feet of fuselage, sealed in a perspex dome that offered no heat, no comfort, and no company. On long missions, the temperature dropped to 40 below. Frostbite was common. Some gunners had lost fingers, toes, even pieces of their faces. Tommy wore silk gloves under his leather gauntlets and smeared lanolin on his cheeks, but he had still lost feeling in his left pinky 3 missions ago. It had never come back. Over the intercom, the pilot's voice cut through his thoughts. "All crew, check in. We're taxiing in 2 minutes." One by one, they reported. Pilot Officer James Crawford at the controls, 24 years old, married, with a baby daughter born 2 weeks after he shipped out to Lincolnshire. Sergeant Billy Walsh in the bomb aimer's position, just 19, the youngest aboard, from Liverpool, still writing letters to a girl who had already married someone else. Flight Sergeant MacDonald, Mac, at the flight engineer's station, the old man of the crew at 30, father of 3, responsible for keeping 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines running through flak and fire and freezing cold. Sergeant Peter White, chalky, hunched over his navigation table, former mathematics student at Cambridge, now calculating routes through corridors of death. Sergeant Harry Simmons at the wireless set, quiet and religious, who prayed before every mission and kept a small Bible in his flight suit. And Sergeant George Armstrong, Geordie, in the mid-upper turret, a former coal miner from Newcastle who had traded one kind of darkness for another. 7 men. 7 lives. One ugly aircraft with a 67-foot wingspan and a bomb bay that could carry 14,000 pounds of high explosives. Lancaster ED 559, Phantom Queen, painted in faded letters beneath the cockpit. Somebody else's aircraft before they inherited it. They tried not to think about what had happened to the previous crew. The bomber rumbled down the runway and lifted into the English night. Below, the lights of Lincolnshire vanished as they climbed through cloud. Above, the stars emerged, cold and indifferent. For 3 hours, they flew in silence. Navigation by stars and dead reckoning. No radio contact, no navigation beacons, anything that could give away position was forbidden. Just 7 men in a metal tube, crossing the North Sea toward Germany, where 50,000 anti-aircraft guns and 1,000 night fighters waited to kill them. Tommy watched the darkness through his turret. He rotated constantly, scanning above and below, left and right, looking for the shadow that didn't belong. German night fighters approached from below and behind, everyone knew that. They came through the blind spot and opened fire before you knew they were there. A rear gunner's job was to know anyway. To see what couldn't be seen. To live when statistics said you should die, the flak began over the Dutch coast. Distant thumps of anti-aircraft fire, black puffs of smoke briefly illuminated by their own explosions. Crawford held course. You couldn't dodge flak, you just flew through it and prayed. Over the roar, the sky became hell. Searchlights swept across the clouds, catching bombers in their glare, holding them for the guns below. Tommy watched a Lancaster half a mile away get caught in a cone of light, 3 beams converging on it like fingers closing around a moth. Then the flak found it. The aircraft became a fireball. 7 men, gone in an instant. No parachutes. "Steady, boys," Crawford said over the intercom. His voice was calm. It was always calm. "Bomb run in 4 minutes. Billy, she's yours." The Lancaster leveled out for the bombing run, straight and level flight directly over the target, the most dangerous moment of any mission. No evasive action. No escape. Just 30 seconds of perfect stillness while Billy sighted the bombs and the flak tried to kill them. Tommy saw the fighter coming out of shape against the stars, darker than the darkness around it. Moving wrong. He swung his guns toward it and screamed into the intercom, "Fighter! Fighter! Corkscrew port!" Crawford threw the Lancaster into a violent diving turn. Tommy opened fire. The German pilot, whoever he was, fired 2 muzzle flashes bright in the darkness. But Crawford's maneuver had thrown off his aim. The rounds went wide. Tommy kept firing. He saw his tracers strike the fighter's wing. Then Crawford rolled the other way, and the G-forces slammed Tommy against his turret, and the world spun, and the fighter was gone. "Lost him," Tommy gasped. "He's gone." Silence on the intercom. Then Crawford's voice, steady as ever, "Good work, Tommy. Billy, complete the bomb run." They dropped their bombs. They turned for home. They flew for 5 more hours through darkness and cold and fear. When they landed at Wickenby, dawn was breaking. Tommy climbed out of his turret and stood on solid ground. His legs shook so badly he had to hold the fuselage for support. 12 aircraft had left. 9 came back. 33 empty chairs at breakfast. Tommy wondered if the German pilot had made it home. He wondered if he had killed him. He didn't know which answer he wanted. The radar screen filled with ghosts. Major Werner Colby, promoted twice since that humiliating night over Essen, stared at his instruments in disbelief. Where moments ago there had been clear sky and a few distant contacts, now there were thousands. Thousands of signals, thousands of targets, the green glow of the cathode tube blazing with impossible returns. "What is this?" Dieter Hahn's voice cracked through the intercom. "I'm reading contacts everywhere." "Everywhere." Colby banked left, then right, trying to find a real target among the swarm of phantoms. Nothing made sense. The signals were all around them, above and below, a cloud of electronic chaos that turned their miracle radar into useless noise. The date was July 24, 1943. The target was Hamburg. And the British had just deployed the most devastating electronic countermeasure of the war. They called it window, bundles of aluminum foil strips, cut to precisely half the wavelength of German radar. When dropped from bombers by the thousand, each strip returned a signal identical to an aircraft. One Lancaster could release enough window to create hundreds of false targets on German screens. 700 Lancasters could create an impenetrable curtain of electronic blindness. Colby was flying blind. Every night fighter over Germany was flying blind. The elaborate system of radar-guided interception that had killed hundreds of British bombers suddenly meant nothing. The barns had bitten back. 30,000 feet below, Hamburg burned. Tommy Reeves watched through his turret as the firestorm consumed the city. He had seen bombing before, the orange glow of fires, the smoke rising in columns. This was different. This was a force of nature. The incendiary bombs had done their work too well. Thousands of fires had merged into one, a conflagration so intense that it created its own weather system. Superheated air rose at incredible speeds, sucking in fresh oxygen from the surrounding streets at hurricane force. The winds reached 150 miles per hour. People were torn from their feet and blown into the flames. Shelters became ovens. Asphalt melted and trapped those who tried to flee. The firestorm killed 40,000 civilians in a single night. Tommy had been raised Methodist. His mother had taught him that hell was a place of eternal fire reserved for the wicked. Watching Hamburg, he understood for the first time that hell was something men could build. Something he was helping to build. Christ, Geordie whispered over the intercom. Look at it. Nobody responded. There was nothing to say, the Lancaster shuddered. Not from flak, from the thermals rising off the burning city. Bombers were being thrown around like paper in a bonfire, caught in updrafts that could flip an aircraft or shatter its wings. Crawford fought the controls, his calm finally broken. Bloody hell, she won't hold steady. They completed their bomb run anyway. They dropped their load into the inferno below. Then they turned for home, climbing away from the city that had become a funeral pyre. Werner Colby found them 40 minutes later. Without radar, he had resorted to the oldest hunting method of all, eyes and instinct. He flew toward the bomber stream and waited, scanning the darkness for silhouettes against the stars. The moon was bright tonight. Too bright. The British had made a mistake with their timing. Window might blind his radar, but his eyes still worked that he saw the Lancaster 2,000 feet below, trailing slightly from the mainstream. Its port outer engine was feathered, damaged by flak over the target. An injured straggler, struggling to keep up with the herd. Colby felt the old thrill surge through him. 13 kills. Tonight would make 14. Tommy saw him coming, the shape dropped from above like a hawk stooping on prey, no radar warning, no time to think. Tommy screamed the alarm and opened fire in the same breath. Crawford corkscrewed. The night fighter's cannons blazed. 20mm shells punched through the Lancaster's fuselage. Mac screamed, shrapnel had torn into his leg. The port inner engine exploded into flames, adding to the port outer already dead. 2 engines gone. The aircraft yawed viciously to the left. Tommy kept firing. He couldn't see if he was hitting anything. The world was spinning, the G-forces crushing, the darkness filled with tracers and fire and the sound of men screaming. Then Crawford did something impossible. He rolled the dying Lancaster inverted, dove 5,000 feet in seconds, and pulled out so hard that the airframe groaned and Tommy blacked out for an instant from the blood draining from his head. When his vision cleared, the fighter was gone. Where is he? Crawford's voice, ragged now. Tommy, do you have eyes on? Tommy searched the darkness. Nothing. Lost him. He's gone. Mac, how bad? I'll live. Mac's voice was tight with pain. But we've got fire in number 2. I'm shutting her down. 2 engines dead. 1 crew member wounded. 300 miles of hostile territory between them and home. The Lancaster was crippled, bleeding fuel and hydraulic fluid, held aloft by 2 screaming Merlins and Crawford's iron will. They should have been dead. The statistics said they should be dead. But the flying barn kept flying. Colby watched them go. His own aircraft had taken hits, the rear gunner had been accurate, terrifyingly accurate. Oil pressure was dropping. His port engine was running rough. He couldn't pursue even if he wanted to. He turned for home, cursing the aluminum confetti that had stolen his radar, cursing the stubborn British pilots who refused to die, cursing the war that had turned him into a hunter of barns. Behind him, Hamburg still burned. The flames would be visible for 200 miles. And somewhere in the darkness, a crippled Lancaster limped toward England on 2 engines and a prayer. Tommy's hands shook when he held his pint. They always shook now. 29 missions completed. 1 more and he could go home. 1 more night in the freezing turret, 1 more dance with the fighters and the flak, 1 more roll of the dice against odds that killed 44% of everyone who played. The pub near Wickenby was quiet tonight. Most of the men Tommy had trained with were dead. The new crews looked at him like he was a ghost, the old man of the squadron at 23, the rear gunner who had somehow survived when the average lasted 5 missions. They didn't ask him for advice. They didn't want to know what he knew. Tomorrow night, Nuremberg. Deep penetration raid, 700 bombers, industrial targets. The briefing officer had said German defenses were weakened. Intelligence said the route would be safe. Tommy had stopped believing intelligence a long time ago that he finished his beer and went to bed. He dreamed of falling aircraft and burning cities and a German fighter that kept coming, again and again, out of the darkness behind him. March 30, 1944. The night that would become the worst in Bomber Command history. The weather was wrong. The forecast had promised cloud cover to hide the bomber stream. Instead, the sky was clear, the moon nearly full, and the contrails of 700 aircraft drew white lines across the heavens for every German fighter to see. Tommy knew they were in trouble before they crossed the coast. The radio was alive with distress calls. Aircraft were going down all around them, not one or two, but dozens. The German controllers had predicted the route perfectly. Every night fighter in Western Europe was waiting. Jesus, Billy whispered from his position. Look at them. Through the canopy, Crawford could see bombers dying. Explosions bloomed in the darkness, one after another, each one a crew of 7 men becoming ash and memory. In the first hour alone, 50 aircraft went down. By dawn, 95 would be lost. 670 men killed in a single night. Tommy rotated his turret constantly, searching for the shadow that would come for them. His hands had stopped shaking. Fear had passed through him and out the other side, leaving behind something cold and focused. This was probably his last night alive. He had made peace with that months ago. Werner Kolbe was airborne with 31 kills marked on his fuselage. He was tired of the killing, tired of the dying, tired of watching young men burn because old men couldn't stop fighting. But he kept flying because stopping meant admitting the war was lost, and the war couldn't be lost, because if the war was lost then all those deaths meant nothing. His new aircraft had upgraded radar that cut through window. His cannons had been replaced with heavier 30mm guns that could tear a bomber apart with 3 hits. He was more lethal than ever. He was also more exhausted than ever. He found the Lancaster at 2 in the morning, 40 miles south of Nuremberg. Tommy saw him at the same moment. The shape rising from below, the familiar silhouette of a Bf-110, climbing through the blind spot. But Tommy was waiting. He had always been waiting. Both men fired together. 30mm shells ripped into the Lancaster's fuselage. Tommy's bullets hammered the fighter's engine cowling. Crawford corkscrewed, but the aircraft responded sluggishly. Something was wrong, something was damaged. The fighter stayed with them. Number 4's hit. Mac shouted. I'm losing oil pressure. Another burst from the fighter. The mid-upper turret exploded. Geordie screamed once, then went silent. Tommy kept firing, tears streaming down his face, his guns tracking the German through every twist and turn that he hit the fighter's cockpit. He saw the canopy shatter. The Bf-110 rolled away, smoke pouring from its engine, spiraling down into the darkness. Bail out. Crawford's voice was steady even now. Everyone bail out. That's an order. The Lancaster was dying. 2 engines gone, fire spreading through the wing, hydraulics failing. They had 30 seconds, maybe less. Tommy should have moved. He should have abandoned his turret and jumped. But the escape hatch was jammed, shrapnel had warped the frame. He couldn't get out. He kept firing at nothing, covering his friends as they jumped, watching their parachutes bloom in the moonlight. Chalky got out. Harry got out. Matt got out, somehow, dragging his wounded leg behind him. Billy made it too. Crawford stayed at the controls. Someone had to keep the aircraft level while the others escaped. Someone had to die so the rest could live. That was the deal. That had always been the deal. Get out, Tommy. Crawford's voice, calm to the end. That's an order. I can't, sir. Hatch is jammed. Silence. Then, I'm sorry, Tommy. The Lancaster hit the ground at 200 miles per hour. The impact scattered wreckage across a Belgian farmer's field for 2 kilometers. The fuel tanks exploded. The bombs cooked off one by one. Tommy woke in a hospital 3 days later. The turret had broken free on impact, rolling across the field with him inside, battered and broken but alive. Crawford was dead. Billy was captured. The others made it to the resistance. Werner Kolbe crashed in Germany. He survived with a shattered spine. He would never walk properly again. He would never fly again. The war ended 13 months later. Bomber Command had lost 55,000 men, 44% of everyone who served. The Lancaster had flown over 150,000 sorties and dropped 600,000 tons of bombs. It had helped destroy the Nazi war machine. The cost was measured in cities burned and young men buried and survivors who never stopped shaking. In 1945, Tommy visited the Imperial War Museum, where a Lancaster was being prepared for display. He stood beneath the massive wings and listened to a father tell his son, "Just an old bomber. Nothing special." Tommy didn't correct him. The men who had flown inside the bold bomber didn't need monuments. They had each other's memories. They had the knowledge of what they had done and what it had cost. Somewhere in Germany, Werner Kolbe read about the museum exhibit. He remembered the cartoon on the ready room wall, the ugly shape with the stubby wings, the joke that had stopped being funny a long time ago, the flying barn. The thing they had mocked. The thing that had kept coming, night after night, year after year, until there was nothing left to bomb. The barn had won.